Submitting Life with Chase Hill and Ty Gay.
Be cool. Your jiu-jitsu story is way cooler than mine. And I think the difference between, I was talking to somebody this the other day in class, is like my jiu-jitsu story is very centralized. So what I mean by that is I was able to come to one place. I've gotten all my training from you.
Right.
And someone asked me your story, and I was like, well, do you have like 30 minutes?
Yeah, right.
Because your story is much different. You couldn't go to one place and just get your black belt. I mean, you had to.
Yeah, there wasn't really a place like that.
You've been learning on the go, basically. You've had to learn from people.
Yeah, it was kind of hard in the beginning. There just wasn't schools. For one, there wasn't the internet. Not like we have it now. There wasn't YouTube and things like that. We didn't have the same kind of, I guess, bandwidth back then. So dial-up wasn't as easy to look at jiu-jitsu moves, I guess. But, yeah, so it was like 97 is when I kind of got started in jiu-jitsu. And, shoot, we'll have to do this is a very brief history here. So I started.
What's the first time you saw jiu-jitsu?
I saw jiu-jitsu. A friend of mine brought over a videotape. He was like, dude, check out this video. It was a VHS tape.
A VHS tape, not a DVD.
No, it was a VHS tape. And it was UFC 1. And it was actually some tapes that Lovato Sr. had. So if you don't know who Rafael Lovato is, Rafael Lovato Jr. is like the most decorated American jiu-jitsu guy out there. And his dad, Senior Lovato, ran a school called MAI at the time. And somehow one of my friends ended up with some tapes that those guys were circulating around, which was the UFC like 1 and 2, I think. He brought it over to the house and let me watch that, and I was like, oh my God. So I definitely wanted to start training that at that point. And at the time, I didn't have very much money and stuff, and I was in a band that was traveling around called Lure back in the day. And so I kind of just, and those guys there weren't even really training jiu-jitsu that much. Lovato wasn't a blue belt or anything yet. So
how old was Junior?
Junior was just a kid. So I don't know. He was very young at the time. Just looked like a kid. And not like he does now, like a straight killer.
Like a monster. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I got to watch some of those tapes, and then shortly thereafter that, the UFC 4 happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Got to see that. That was really crazy. And then shortly thereafter that, I don't know how many years later, it wasn't too much longer than that, is when I met Henry. And I met Henry backstage at a Tool concert, because I was a big rock and roll fan, obviously. It was a band called Tool. The singer Maynard does jiu-jitsu and had Henry going with them on tour to teach him jiu-jitsu. And so...
Because Maynard trained at Hickson's.
Because Maynard trained at Hickson's Academy, that's right. And so did Henry at the time. So he brought Henry on the road with him. And that was his main dude, his main security guy for a long time. And Henry was getting dropped off in Oklahoma off of one of the tours. And so while he was in Oklahoma, showed me some just basic stuff that was considered the basics from Hickson's Academy at the time. Back then, those moves were really hidden, and Henry wasn't allowed to really say that he was teaching me any of that stuff. It was so taboo, you know, because Hickson was very secretive back then. Nowadays, he's trying to like show all the secrets now because he knows it's going to be lost if he doesn't. So, totally different topic. But so after a while of that, I knew that I had to train somewhere, and there wasn't no real jiu-jitsu schools, like Brazilian jiu-jitsu schools around back then, so I went to train at a judo school called USA Stars. They had a lot of good Olympic guys, and Pat Burst is an Olympic judo coach, and is amazing guy, amazing judo guy and mentor, and there was a bunch of guys there, Tony Akiwa, so many guys that were just really good at judo, and then they were doing something called combat jiu-jitsu back then. It's kind of like a Japanese-style jiu-jitsu, I guess, but it was very much like the Gracies were in the beginning. Now that I've been in the game for a long time, I can look back and see, like in the Gracie archives and stuff, like what kind of moves they were doing, what was going on. It was very similar to what we were doing back then as well. Frank Trigg was training with us. Gosh, I can't remember all the guys. There were several people that ended up doing some stuff later on that were training there, and it was a meat grinder. We were, golly, it was rough.
Because you were training jiu-jitsu with a bunch of judo guys, weren't you?
Yeah, and a bunch of MMA guys. Back then, MMA was just starting to come around, and so there's a bunch of underground stuff.
It was more like no bars, right?
Yeah, and something called Shuto people were doing too, which was like this Japanese kind of organization that was going on. It was very much like MMA with a little more pads, maybe. So to train with a lot of those guys coming up, I was pretty young. That was pretty cool, but I wasn't very confident in myself at the time. Jiu-Jitsu was kind of starting to build that in me, but I was just very kind of an insecure kid and just didn't really believe in myself or anything. And there was a guy who had a karate school, I remember, and he asked me if I would be interested in coming to teach some classes at his place. I was kind of hesitant to do so, and I went and did it, and I think he paid me like $20 to come out and teach a class like a couple times a month. But, it was, I was in a band still at the time, a singer in a band, and I had a pivotal point. We'll have to make a whole podcast probably on this, but I'll just cover it briefly. I was working at a pizza place. Like I said, I had a few offers to teach some classes with that guy that had offered me some classes, but there was really no interest in doing that because I just didn't really believe in myself. I was with a girl that, probably the wrong girl. Anyway, so I went over to a buddy's house, and they were all doing mushrooms that night. Yep, the magical kind. And I'd done mushrooms before. Sometimes I'd had okay luck with them, not make me feel too sick or whatever. If you don't know, mushrooms will make you feel sick. By the way, I'm not endorsing drug use or anything. I'm just telling you my story, so don't get all bent out of shape over it. So anyway, they were making these shots. It's where you boil the mushrooms up and you make like a shot, like you'd shoot a shot of Jack Daniels or whatever, but it was a shot of magic mushrooms. It was like a 10-gram shot. For those that don't know, most people take about 1 gram or 2 grams, and then you see like colors and stuff and have an experience and whatever. One with nature.
And you took 10?
Yeah, I took 10. And something happened to me. It was a very intense moment. The room blacked out. I'll cover this briefly. The room blacked out, and I was holding on to my girlfriend's hand at the time. I looked down at the hand, and the hand that I was holding turned into the devil's hand, and it got really cold. The whole room blacked out, and I was standing in black sand. I look up, and there is this shape-shifting, like smoke/flame devil, and I think it was a devil. It was shape-shifting. It had this long tail, and it would whip me with the tail. And every time it would whip me, it would shock the living crap out of me. And I would see white, and I'd try to dodge and move, and jump into the sand.
You just couldn't get out of the way?
I couldn't get out of the way, and it kept hitting me. And each time it would hit me, it was like I could feel my life force bar going down. Now, I knew that I had taken mushrooms, so I'm thinking to myself, I must have poisoned myself. And it's getting bad. And then he just kept whipping me with the tail, and he couldn't run in the sand because it's frickin' sand, black sand. Just, it was horrible. And so he hits me again, and I know it is it. This is the last one. I can't take it anymore. He's going to hit me again. I'm going to die. And I'm like, oh, my God, I'm going to die taking mushrooms. I have a horrible bad trip. I'm going to die with the devil killing me. It's going to be horrible. So here it comes, one last hit, and he hit me. He hit me, and I still remember it. It makes me kind of shake. But it killed me. Totally thought that I was dead. I had what some would call an ego death. And a little pinhole happened in the black. Like I was just in nothingness, and a pinhole of just a spot happened. And then out of that spot, opened up the whole room. And there I was in the room with all my friends, and the girl trying to hold my hand. And all my friends were watching a TV show, and everybody was fine except for me. And I went through this horrible, death. I released the girl's hand, and I said, it's over between me and you. And everybody else was still tripping really, really bad, but I was stone cold sober, like completely sober. I'd never been more sober in my entire life. I left the place, went home, didn't do mushrooms, drink a beer for 3 years after that, nothing. But it changed my life because I didn't any longer have some sort of weird thing about, well, you can't go do whatever. I died. So I went to the pizza place, and I was like, this is my 2 weeks.
You have like a new form of confidence.
I went to the guy who had offered me a couple of days a week teaching. I was like, hey, here's the thing. I'll teach for you as many days as you'll give me time. And that's what started my teaching journey, which is pretty crazy.